Hi, good morning, Maria. How are you?
Good. It's good to meet you, Gabriel. Thank you for taking this time to meet with us this morning. Good morning, and thank you, Gabriel Vasquez, for taking this time to meet with our Las Cruces, the new online magazine representing District 3. How are you doing? How is your team?
I'm doing great this morning. It's a little hot in the district this week, as it has been this whole summer. So we're all just trying to cope with so much, from COVID um, to the heat, to some of the issues that are stemming from the employment issues that we're having around the city, related to also the economic uh, downturn that we're in. But all things considered, we're resilient people here in Las Cruces, and so I'm optimistic about our recovery.
Well, thank you so much. So my first question for you, Gabriel, what are some of the political challenges that you've faced during this pandemic? Have there been roadblocks or has there been any unexpected things that have happened during this process navigating the situation?
Sure. I mean, I think the biggest roadblock or obstacle that we've had is really getting that federal funding flowing into our community. That sometimes has been limited to bigger cities, for example, Albuquerque, as a recipient of a lot of CARE Act dollars because of the size of their city, has been able to do more than I think we have been able to do by virtue of how we're categorized. And so things like being able to provide small business assistance directly, for example, for restaurants who want to build patios, the whole inspection process as it pertains to making sure that our small businesses are safe. We haven't been funded to do that as other cities have. And so that's been a roadblock, that's been a challenge, but also this the education, public education around the pandemic. And what we're trying to do to keep our community safe is, in accordance with the medical professionals, not at the CDC, but really in New Mexico, that we've been briefed by in our various healthcare institutions and our State Department of Health. And so getting that information out to the public that lets them know why the city is making the decisions that it's making to protect the health and well-being of our community has been a little bit of a challenge, because unfortunately there's a lot of misinformation that circulates through social media and other communications networks. But we're doing our best with the best interest of our community in mind. But those are some of the things that have been a little bit difficult to navigate in the last several months.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Gabriel. A lot of things that we normally don't take into consideration when we're processing this whole situation as a public. So, do you have any advice for individuals that are city council members in similar towns from your experience here in Las Cruces? Are there best practices you've been following?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's following the advice of medical professionals in our community, in our state, in our region, and making decisions that are best, that are in line with the interest of public safety and public health. Oftentimes, those are unpopular decisions. I don't want to be in the business of restricting small businesses or local businesses, of keeping schools from being open, of being restrictive in other areas, like opening our parks and other things like that. But in the end, it comes down to our public health. It comes down to our abuelitos, our abuelitas, our tios, our tias, our mothers and fathers, and our kids, and making sure that they can stay healthy and have an opportunity to get out of this pandemic in the best way possible. And so the only advice that I could really give is that let's listen to the medical professionals in our region and make those decisions based on science, based on the data, although sometimes those decisions may not be popular with the general public.
Wonderful, thank you. Do you have any advice for any medical personnel, hospitals, doctors, or care facilities that may be considering partnering with local governments? Is there anything that they can do to enhance the communication process and make sure that everything works as seamlessly as possible?
Absolutely. I think we have a good relationship here with our two biggest healthcare facilities at Memorial Medical and at Mountain View Regional. And we have heard from experts from both of those hospitals, as well as from the State Department of Health on a regular basis through work sessions. In fact, when the pandemic first started, we added a extra work session to discuss essentially get updates from our medical community about how we should be crafting policy in accordance to what they're seeing on the ground. And so the advice that I would give to them is to please engage with their local governments, because some of the policies that a government enacts directly impact, the number of people going into a healthcare facility, or the number of testing facilities that we have, or the type of testing that we have. Oftentimes, local governments can either bring money to the table to have those facilities be available, especially for testing, or we can help troubleshoot any issues that may be happening at higher levels of government at the state or federal level. And so that communication with elected officials from the medical professionals is really critical and really important to have a holistic approach to dealing with the pandemic.
Thank you. What will our new normal look like in Las Cruces for the next 12 to 18 months?
That's a great question, and I wish I had a better answer for you, Maria. I am not sure what that new normal looks like. I think from the beginning of this pandemic, we all had thoughts about where we'd be this month. We're in August now, and so in March, when this first started, and seeing what was happening in other countries, we figured we might be in the clear, or at least have had our case number reduced significantly by this point in time, and that maybe life would have been back to normal. But that obviously is not the case. Unfortunately, the United States accounts for almost a quarter of the active COVID cases around the world, and Las Cruces and Doña Ana have not been immune to that. Our case spike has actually risen later than many other communities in the United States and even in New Mexico. And so we're seeing Doña Ana County now really be a hotbed for coronavirus in a way that it wasn't when the outbreak first started. And so we're in a place now where we have to take maximum precaution. We're seeing cases higher than Bernalillo County currently, which with a population 6 or 7 times bigger than our city. And so that's a little bit troubling. We all need to stick together to be able to be where we want to be. I hope that in 12 months or 18 months, our kids can be back in school for full regular sessions, that our university can have full in-class learning again, that we can enjoy those quality of life things that we all love, like visiting our local parks, going to an Aggies basketball game or Aggies football game, going to a restaurant, visiting a local business. And I think if we continue to be very cautious and very strict in our approach, that we might get there. Of course, the promise of a vaccine is always hopefully gives people a little bit of hope in terms of that being able to alleviate some of the outbreaks that we have now through a medical treatment. But who knows, because the vaccines at this point, even though they're in the testing phase, we just don't know what type of impact or effect they're going to have on local populations. So that's where I hope we're going to be. I just can't predict it, but certainly we are resilient and we will get through this. Our local economy, despite our rising numbers, has not dipped as much as other cities. Our GRT hasn't dropped as much. That's our gross receipts tax, hasn't dropped as much as other communities. And so I think we'll be okay coming out of this economically if we continue to take the precautions we need to take.
Thank you for sharing that information. It is very troubling to hear those percentages. And I just want to clarify, is that based off of percentage, or is that just number of cases that were exceeding Bernalillo?
That's based off of number of cases. And so, on a daily basis, we're kind of competing with Bernalillo in the last 2 to 3 weeks. We can see upwards of 80 cases, 90 cases in one day, and Bernalillo will see 40 to 50 cases in one day. And so percentage-wise, it's much higher than the actual. I mean, they're both just as high, but percentage-wise, if you want to look at per capita cases, they're pretty bad. We're seeing spikes in other parts of southern New Mexico as well that per population are worse than Doña Ana County. I was just looking at Lee County, Eddy County yesterday, and per capita their case rate is a lot higher than ours. So it's not to say that we're the worst county, but certainly we have a lot of work to do. And southern New Mexico now seems to be the hotspot for the pandemic.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. That is very
Sure.
troubling. Be praying for all the people that are working through that, and thank you for dedicating your time as a public servant to help us in this.
Sure.
In addition to this COVID-19 crisis, we've experienced an awareness of extreme racism in America. Are you aware of any racism issues in the city's departments? What is your message on this issue?
Thank you. That's a great question. I think racism exists everywhere. I think it permeates our culture, our society, our local governments, our corporate world. Just about every part of life that we experience has some racism embedded into it, and that's a painful and dark history in our country that unfortunately we've never been able to eradicate. I remember when I was younger and when I was attending school at New Mexico State University, and I was in a debate with college Republicans at the time. I was part of the college Democrats, and I remember we had agreed on so much together about this issue of racism, and I was so hopeful, thinking that the next generation of young people who would rise up to be in these positions of in the corporate world, in the nonprofit world, and local government, that we would eradicate racism, that it would be gone, because we had these shared values of what it meant to be American. And especially in New Mexico, where we are out of cultures, I was excited for the future. I have become less optimistic about where this country stands in terms of being able to eradicate racism, because it is intergenerational, it is passed on, it is embedded into our systems. So, I really can't comment about a question like that in terms of our particular departments. What I can say is that I am being as proactive as I can, along with my city councilors, to make sure that things like racial profiling, things like the mistreatment or the abuse of power or authority anywhere within any department is not tolerated, and that when it is found, that we act accordingly and that we act swiftly. And that we send a message to our community that the city of Las Cruces cares about everybody equally. That's a process that will probably go on long before after I'm off the council, unfortunately, because it is so hard to eradicate. But I am absolutely paying attention to that. In fact, I have a meeting with our police chief right after this meeting with you to discuss some of those issues and how we can do better as a community.
Thank you for sharing that. I think complacency is our worst enemy. And when it comes to something like systematic racism and racism in general, we can't be complacent as diverse leaders. We have to stand up and be the voice for the people that don't have one. So I am very proud that you're doing that work. I think too, my question for you is, what is the process to analyze and review all leaders in this situation? Because to say that it is only a white man's thing is a lie. Because I grew up with a very Hispanic cultured family, and even in that family there was a little hint of racism, which is very frustrating, because as a new generation, especially in America, that's something we're trying to really wash away. Yet as a brown woman, it's something that I was surrounded with. I'm a darker complected young lady, and I was treated wrong for being that way, being told don't be in the sun too long, you don't want to get too dark, those kind of,
yeah
things that are just unfair. But I want to know, like, what sort of checks and balances do we have in place?
Absolutely. Well, one of the things I've tried to do as a leader, and one thing I would encourage residents of the city, constituents of the council to do, is to look at the decisions that the council is making, or your individual councilor or mayor are making, to actually fix those systemic changes, or fix those systemic issues that contribute to the type of hierarchy of economic and social structures that we've created, not just in Las Cruces, but nationally. And what I mean by that is, if a city is not investing into its low-income neighborhoods, if a city is not paying attention to areas of the city where predominantly people of color are living, and predominantly people perhaps that earn lower wages or that have more of a difficulty really, doing things like paying their utilities or getting food on the table. If those decisions aren't being made, but your city councilors are giving you, or any elected official is giving you lip service about, well, they care, that's one way to hold them accountable, right? I get emails from a lot of folks, and I try to respond to as many as I can, especially since the Black Lives Matter movement started. And in my answers to those folks, I say, look, my district is one of the poorest in the city. The entire reason I ran for this seat was because I wanted to reinvest back into an older part of the city that traditionally I felt has been neglected. That's my way of trying to level that socioeconomic gap that exists in Las Cruces and in New Mexico, is by reinvesting back into our community and into our neighborhood in a way that is equitable, in a way that gives people an opportunity to have a little bit more wealth for their family so that they can enjoy the same quality of life that everybody else has. Because unless we do that, there's always going to be a culture of the haves and the have-nots, right? I don't want our city to turn into either you live on the hill in Sonoma Ranch or you live in the inner city, and that tells a lot about your skin color, your number of children, whether you're single or you're divorced, whether you're retired or you were born here. And so if we can start to really rethink the way that we do that in a meaningful way with dollars, right, with investments, with projects, then we can start to chip away at some of those systemic issues that create the type of environment that lets racism breed, and that lets people think, oh, well, those are those people that live in that part of the city versus maybe perhaps the wealthier, affluent other people who, we just can't do that. And that's what's happened in so many American cities in the last, 50, 60 years. That has just really been a detriment, and I think has fueled so much of the racism and inequality that we have today. So that's a good way to hold your leaders accountable, is not just by what they say, but what they're pushing for, what they're investing in, what are their projects that they're working on, what do they support. That takes sometimes a little bit of homework, but I'm always happy to discuss those things with my constituents.
Wonderful, thank you. I know, and we're seeing that here in Las Cruces, and it's sad, but I think that we have that ritzy part of Las Cruces, which is the Sonoma Ranch area, and then we have the parts that have been neglected. So I'm excited to see what projects you and your colleagues come up with to help enhance that divide, because I think it's needed. Your colleague, Miss Joanna Bencomo, and I had a very in-depth conversation on this topic in regards to public safety and where our budget goes for that area, and how it's so narrow, how it's fire and police and that's it. And I feel like we're missing a really big piece of the puzzle, which is the mental health piece. We're dealing with intergenerational trauma. We're dealing with Chicanos and Hispanics and Latino American individuals and Native American, let's not forget, that are dealing with the genocide that they experienced, not only from the Spaniards, but also from the American people when they did the Manifest Destiny movement and expanded from sea to shining sea. And New Mexico is falling right there in the middle. So for me as a leader in our area, I feel that we need to really open the dialogue with all the leaders in these areas and in these departments, because we need to evaluate what we can do to help educate our younger leaders and also our leaders that are currently in office. So what sort of trainings or what sort of conversations are happening to enhance this dialogue and to create this ever-changing dynamic between the people?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that there's actually a big gap there, Maria. I'll be honest with you. I think we need to have more conversations. We need to have more of our local folks speak up. And I think this is a great opportunity. What you're doing here hopefully evokes some conversation and evokes some thought about what we could do better in terms of a public discourse that drives policy and that drives the narrative of who we want to be as a city, and that reaches our departments and it reaches our decision making at the city and at the county level. So this is a wonderful tool, I think, to hopefully be able to get some information out and evoke some response. But I think we're hiring a new city manager. Mr. Ifo Pili comes from Eagle Mountain, Utah. He is a native of American Samoa, and he is somebody that I believe is going to come in and help make some of those systemic changes for us. As a city council, we unfortunately can't talk to any of the city staff. It's really barred from our position so that we're not micromanaging departments. It's really our city manager who implements city council policy and budget and administrative decisions. And so without a steady leader at the helm that can actually set that tone and set that culture within our departments of what we want to see, then sometimes we're a little bit powerless. And I know folks don't always know that it's a complicated process. I didn't know that before coming into this position, but we only have one employee. That's the only person we can really talk to. And of course we can talk to our police chief and other department heads, but we always have to go through the city manager. So when the new city manager comes on board, one of the things I've encouraged him to do early on is to have those dialogues with the community, to open up those public forums so that he can hear directly from residents about the type of community Las Cruces is and Las Cruces wants to be, and that those things get back to the city council, that council members participate in those discussions, and that we can have a unified approach to start turning the boat the right way, start steering the ship the right way. But that can only come with that leadership at the city management position. The city manager gets paid a lot in this city. I was so surprised when I came on board to see the type of salary that city managers command, especially for a city of our size. And so there's a lot of weight on their shoulders, just as there is on a public official, to make the right decisions for the community. Apart from running the city, it's really the city manager that has to implement the vision of the council and the policy of the council. And so we could be doing more. I'm looking forward to having the city manager come on board that will be doing more. I think he's going to be terrific. I personally love to see a person of color in this position lead our city forward. That's perhaps a little bit more reflective of our community and really our nation as a whole. So there's a lot more we could be doing. We are just opening up discussions about the city, budget priorities. On our next go around in the city, I can guarantee you it's going to be more highly scrutinized than it has been before. When you don't come from that background as a financial or policy analyst, but you're a young person or you're a person of color or you're somebody who's really interested in doing good for their community, there's a big learning curve in terms of how the city functions and what role that you have in deciding budget decisions. And so with folks like Councilor Bencomo now on board, Councilor Abeta Stuvi now on board, I'm confident that we're going to scrutinize the budget and we are going to prioritize the well-being of people versus the criminalization of people moving forward. And we just saw a proposal also from Mayor Pro Tem Gandara to bring some supplemental mental health care services to our community that would actually assist first responders, the fire department, the police department, or sometimes actually replace them responding to events altogether with licensed psychologists, licensed clinicians that I was disappointed we didn't get further with that discussion at our work session. But those are the type of things that I'm committed to supporting, where if we do have to take budget away from a specific department, whether be police or otherwise, I don't think we have to, because we have a budget that I think we can support that currently. But we also have to look at where the inefficiencies are, where the redundancies are, where we would not rather respond with force or with police. And if we don't need those positions anymore, if we don't need those budget line items anymore, then we need to get rid of them. And that's a decision I'm happy to try to champion at the city council.
Beautifully said. I think too, it's not in their wheelhouse. They're dealing with a robbery and then they have to come help a mental health issue. It's unfair to them. It's unfair
Absolutely.
to them.
Yep.
So I think that's a great solution. I think that we're on the right track, and I will be sending you all positive vibes so that you guys can work through that. One thing that I did want to talk to you about was a post I saw on Facebook, and I saw that you reacted to it. It was a few months back. There was a young man that was on an ATV, and a gentleman threw a brick at him and called him a really unfair slur, and
Yeah.
he had to go to the hospital and he had to get some stitches. How did you respond to that situation?
Well, first I got to say I haven't looked into it further since that happened. That's something I know the police department was investigating. However, I don't doubt that happened. I don't doubt that things like this are happening. I have experienced racism throughout my whole life. As a kid, I grew up in Ciudad Juarez and moved to Bloomington, Indiana, when I was like 9 or 10 years old. And it was a culture shock for me. It was a place where I first learned what racism was and how, what it meant to be treated differently, coming from a Mexican community to, the Midwest of the United States. And so from microaggressions to systemic racism to outward, name calling or acts of violence, it's always been there. And in this administration that we're in today, it has become more profound. It has become more public. It has become more widely accepted and commonplace. And so it's really sad that an event like that could just be one of a series of events that happens every day in our country, and increasingly more in Las Cruces. People with racist sentiments and the ability or the desire to act on them has increased. I know that for sure. And so I was disgusted. I was upset because, as you mentioned before, Maria, we are on stolen land. We are sitting here in what used to be, Mexican territory, even before, before the Guadalupe Hidalgo Treaty. The border crossed so many of us in our communities. And before that, we're on Mescalero, Apache, and Piro Manso Tiwa land, and they were forcibly removed from this land. And so for people to denigrate or to act in a racist way against people of color in a place that has traditionally been inhabited by people of color is something I take very personally. Because if we all want to be a community that can live in harmony together, then we cannot have that in our community, and we have to have zero tolerance for that in our community. So my initial reaction was just anger, because that's so much of what's being propagated at the national level is being manifested in our local communities through these acts of violence, acts of racism. And so very upset. I don't want to see that, and I want to make sure that acts like that are investigated and prosecuted as hate crimes, if under the federal law, if that's indeed what they are.
Thank you for taking a stance. I really appreciate that. I have 2 more questions for you, and then we'll go ahead and end our interview for today. Let you get back to all your busy work. I know you've done some great work for us. So what advice do you have for the members of our community in this time?
I would say to continue to get involved, to continue to pay attention as much as people can and have the capacity to. I know it's a difficult time to be focusing sometimes on things like local government or public policy, but I can tell you, Maria, I hear from the same probably 15 to 20 constituents on a regular basis every week that I've heard from since I took this position. Yeah, I won't. I'll just say most of them are not from my district, and they usually have a unified or kind of agenda, or they all sort of talk to each other and decide kind of what they're going to advocate for, and they push it really hard on the city council by email, by phone calls, back then by in-person meetings, and it was effective. It was effective because the city council would say, well, this is who we heard from, and this is what this is going to guide our decision making based on the public input or public comment. And so since the Black Lives Matter movement started here locally, I heard from people I've never heard from in my life. And it was really powerful because a lot of the beliefs that I hold, a lot of the values that I hold were reinforced by members of the public in a way that I haven't seen before and I haven't heard before. And so there's been some issues that I've been kind of alone in the past on, or at least joined only by a few city councilors, and I say, no, this is the way the people feel, and I know it in my heart, and I know it because I know this community, but oftentimes I didn't have some of that public support that I needed to justify some of those decisions that I wanted to make. Canceling the Stone Garden contract, which is something I pushed since I was here, was one of them. Marijuana legalization and decriminalization was another that I was always trying to drum up support because I knew that it was something that was good for our community. The Nevada Neighborhood Cooling Corridor project is another amazing project in my district that I've been pushing for. So all that public support really leads to influencing those decisions that council makes. And so I just encourage people past the movement, right past, sometimes, we trend up and down in the way that we engage sometimes, depending on our anger levels or depending on what's happening nationally. But I would just encourage folks to continue to get involved. My door is always open. I enjoy having these conversations with people, and then bring policy ideas to the council. That's my other idea, is just, if you have, I don't know it all. Nobody on the council knows it all. Maria, there's folks like you and others who probably have some amazing ideas of what the city could be doing to fix some of these issues. And so I would welcome ideas that I could champion on the council to say, look, this is how we need to redevelop our communities. This is what we need to do with law enforcement. So apart from just making statements about what you believe in or what you value, let's come up with some ideas. Let's collectively as a community come up with some ideas that we can implement. And I think you have a council now that's ready to really to listen to folks and to get those things done.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for that advice. When is your re-election, and how long have you served now on the city council board?
Yeah, my re-election is in 2021, so it's next year. This is my 3rd year serving as a city councilor, and to be honest, I'm not sure what the future holds. I'm also a firm believer that there are some amazing leaders in this community that that deserve to have a seat at the decision-making table. And so I haven't made up my mind about whether I'm going to go for re-election or not. And especially because I'm so confident that there are some amazing people of color, especially women of color. I've been talking to a few in my district. I'm like, hey, would you ever do this? Would you ever, want to do this? So I'm not sure yet what the future holds, but it is next year, and this is my 3rd year. So I have another year left.
Well, thank you for your dedication and time and effort and grace. You've shared a lot with us this morning, and I'm very excited to see what decisions are going to come about, all that is going on, and all these call to action that the public is asking for, especially in the city of Las Cruces. So, Gabriel, I appreciate all that you have to say, and I hope that you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Maria. I appreciate you, and thanks for doing this. This is so important, and I thank you for getting some of the viewpoints of some of the existing council out there. But the heart of who we are is in the city. It's in our neighborhoods. It's in our communities. It's in our people, in our culture. And so I'm just a small little part of that, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today and for doing this.
Of course. Thank you, Gabriel.